Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pictures podcast. This is episode 179, and I am your host, Max Colville. Joining me, as always, is my co hostess with the mostest, Evan Crean. Hello, Evan.
Hey Max, I'm working on getting over a cold, so I'm sounding a little more gravelly than usual, listeners.
Well, I'm glad you can make it. You and I have been talking through the last 24 hours of your availability, and to borrow a thing that the podcast used to be very famous for with our fantasy football talk, you were carrying that questionable tag. Heading into the last 12 hours or so here.
Yep, I'm glad that's no longer questionable. I do have some tea that I'm sipping, so I'll try to mute, and so you guys don't have to hear me sipping tea.
All right, and yes, Evan hinted to it. We have a special guest with us this evening. Um, Thank you for joining us, Emily Hughes.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to chat about horror for weenies and various things we're enjoying.
So yeah, I was so excited to have Emily on the podcast. I saw her promoting her new book, Horror for Weenies, on Blue Sky, and I've been for a long time. I was a weenie for horror, if you will. I I was afraid of a lot of the genre, and this book certainly would have spoken to me during that time when I was exploring horror movies. So I'm very excited to talk to you about your book. I've been enjoying it.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Honestly, the responses I've been getting from people have been so wonderful, and everyone who says, "Oh, I'm a weenie," I'm like, "Yeah, you're my people. I get this."
Emily, can you tell us a little bit about your background as a writer and what led you to writing this book?
Sure. So I actually worked in book publishing for about a dozen years, pretty much starting right after college. And I never thought I would write a book. I I hated writing. Um, but I ended up doing a lot of creative writing for my various publishing jobs. I used to run a website for sci-fi fantasy fans for a major publisher, and I was commissioning and editing and honestly writing a lot of content for it. And that kind of got me back into the habit, post college. And so I kept writing. I started doing some freelance work, and I started writing a newsletter about horror fiction, specifically in I want to say 2019. And from there, I kind of just really leaned into horror. I ran another website for another publisher specifically about horror for a while, and have been, talking about it, reading it, participating in conventions, and just by virtue of having worked in book publishing, I have friends in that world too, and an editor I know had said, "Hey, I kind of have this idea, and can we talk about it?" And it turned out what came out of that was horror for weenies, because I would say I consider myself a reformed weenie. My editor is still very much a weenie, and she was talking about how she likes to she's an inveterate reader of Wikipedia plot synopses. And like, I've been there, I was when Hereditary came out in theaters, I was like, I'm never going to watch that. I'm going to read the Wikipedia synopsis instead. But there's a limited amount of satisfaction you can get from Wikipedia. And she had kind of postulated, what if reading the Wikipedia plot synopsis was actually good? What if we made that a book? and and then Horror for Weenies was born.
Yeah, wonderful.
Nice.
And yeah, we're excited to talk to you more about the book in our featured section this week. Before we dive into that, we have some light news. First, we're gonna start off with some passings that has recently hit Hollywood. We don't love to talk about this stuff, but when big names come across the news wire, we'd like to mention them and honor them in a way. Recently, Maggie Smith passed away. Most people of probably Evan and I's generation will remember her most fondly for her Harry Potter and Downton Abbey roles, but she has certainly been a veteran screen presence for many years. I wasn't aware of the movies that she won Oscars for. I'm very interested in catching up with those. Uh, Evan, did you have any more background with Maggie Smith?
I mean, I've seen her in the Harry Potter movies. I liked her in the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. There was another movie I'd seen her in, I think, called Quartet, that she was good in, and those are the ones that are immediately coming to mind.
Emily, did you have any background with Maggie Smith prior to her late era work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was part of the Harry Potter generation for sure. But this goes all the way back to my kind of Maggie Smith relationship. I had watched The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie at a formative age, and she was also in Hook, that absolutely atrocious Robin Hood adaptation with Tim Curry and Robin Williams.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Jean Brody. That was one that she won her Oscar for, which is one that I'm eager to catch up with. Yeah, it's sad to see her go. We also right before
Oh yeah.
started recording about an hour or so ago, we had learned that Chris Christopherson passed away, and
Oh.
yeah, and I mostly knew him from his roles in Star is Born and Lone Star. Most recently, I saw him in, you know, Evan mentioned Heaven's Gate, uh, which was once considered a disaster, which has
Mhm.
kind of gotten reappraisal over the years. Emily, was this the first you're hearing of this? Or?
Yeah, no, I did actually see this, just as I was sort of sitting down and getting ready to record, and I don't have as strong a connection, with him and his work, but, he was certainly towering.
Right, and Evan, you also mentioned to me Blade and Heaven's Gate when I mentioned his passing.
Yeah, those are things I feel like I remember seeing him in.
Well, sad to lose great Hollywood legends. Another Hollywood legend released a movie this past weekend. Apparently, only film aficionados would really know that or care, because apparently, Francis Ford Coppola's latest movie, Megalopolis, completely bombed at the box office. I don't know if the bad reviews hurt it or helped it, or if just it didn't look interesting to begin with. I don't know, but it didn't do very well. Evan, I know you and I both saw this, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But um, does this surprise you in the least?
Not particularly, no. I mean, I'd heard some things on the festival circuit about this movie being, kinda bonkers and overstuffed, and also one of those, like, "Yeah, gee, there's a reason it took you 40 years," or whatever, however long it took him to make this. There's a reason it took you so long, you had to work so hard to get this thing out the door, so I'm not shocked to hear that people aren't seeing it. I mean, anecdotally, I can say I have a friend who hosts, a film podcast, and it was not on her radar at all. So, that's pretty funny.
My husband is a big film guy as well, and, he's been sort of following the saga of this movie for some time, and so he bought a ticket, he's going to see it this week. I was like, "You have fun and tell me about it after." It seems like a disaster, but, good for you.
Yeah, there's certainly it's funny though, like, and we'll talk about again, and we'll talk about more, but it's hard to imagine that the whole movie should be taken seriously because like there's comedic bits in there that I just like laugh out loud funny, and I found myself being the only one laughing in the theater, and I thought maybe there was something wrong with me, like maybe people thought like it was supposed to be played completely straight, but I don't know. Um, but yeah, we had light news today because we wanted to really talk to Emily about her book. Very excited. I've had some time to dig into the book, and I was telling Evan that I think I read all the way up to just about past Blair Witch Project. So I read a good amount of the book, and Evan, how do you think that you want to handle questions for Emily today? Do you want to just take turns and interview her that way? Pick out some of the questions that you're eager to
Sure.
tell her. All right.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it.
all right. So I figured I'll start, and my question kind of set the tone. I kind of did it by um kind of order of how I read the book, Emily, and
Mhm.
I want to know, and you mentioned this briefly in your intro, that how much did horror literature play into your tolerance of horror movies? And how many of those selections, because if audience members haven't read the book, that Emily provides novels that you could read either in addition or instead of the horror movies if you feel comfortable reading a scary novel instead. I just wanted to know like how much that led to you eventually watching horror movies yourself.
Yeah, so my background with horror is the short version is I've always been fascinated by dark stories, scary stories, macabre stories, weird stories. As a younger child, I gravitated toward, the John Belair's books, those sort of weird, creepy gothic ones with the great Edward Gorey illustrations. I was fascinated by, sharks, and I really wanted to watch Jaws. And, my mom kind of made me hold off on that for a while. But as I talk about this a little bit in the intro, but for my 10th birthday, I was having a sleepover with some friends, and we went to rent a movie at Blockbuster, as you did.
Mhm.
And I picked out Poltergeist, and that was a terrible idea. It's just the worst possible idea for 6, 10-year-old girls. And that really kind of put me off horror for a long time. You know, I I had occasional, moments where I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll try again." And, I think I let a high school boyfriend talk me into watching The Ring, and I couldn't sleep for a couple nights. And then, once I got past college and I started working, and I started working in publishing, and I started to kind of shape figure out what my own taste was as an adult in what I liked to read. I kept going back to the weird stuff, the macabre stuff, the dark stuff, the scary stuff. And from there, I really kind of dove headfirst into horror fiction. And from there, after years of that, I thought, well, I, I I probably owe it to myself to give movies another shot, because I was honestly a little embarrassed of every time, I would be talking to somebody about horror books, and they'd go, "Oh, so do you like horror movies too?" And I'd have to do the whole, "No, I'm just such a scaredy cat." And as an adult with a fresh set of eyes and a different understanding of the genre from the time I'd spent reading horror, I had a whole different relationship with it. I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And now, I still I'm still kind of a scaredy cat. I'll still, look away if I know there's a jump scare coming. There have certainly been, plenty of movies that really freaked me out, even as an adult. But now I find that fun instead of traumatizing. And in terms of the reading list in the book, I mean, that's why I added those titles to each movie, because I thought, okay, if this worked for me, it might work for other people. And also, as a longtime book marketer, I can never resist a chance to talk about books that I love. I have read, I don't know, I definitely haven't read all of them. I've probably read 50 to 60% of those recommendations. But one thing that I consider myself very good at is picking read-alikes that are thematically, similar, or have just the same vibe or the same kind of setup, or just give the same mood. So that was something that I really, really felt strongly about while I was writing.
Yeah, and certainly your background in publishing would bring familiarity with all these titles, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. And a perennial problem in book publishing that, nobody has really figured out how to solve is the problem of, driving attention to what are called backlist titles. Backlist basically means, anything that was published prior to the last, 3 to 6 months.
Hmm.
Because that's when that kind of initial promotion cycle happens, and so it's easy for books that got published a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years ago to kind of fall by the wayside. And so I kind of I'm just on a one woman crusade to make sure that doesn't happen.
um, cool. Evan, go ahead.
So I would say that's a noble crusade, by the way. Um, yeah, you mentioned, in the book, and then you mentioned a little bit before about being a reformed weenie. I wanted to know more about like what that term means to you. If you would describe whatever who a reformed weenie might be to listeners.
I mean, not to at all make light of this comparison, but I as someone who is close to people who have addiction issues, you know, people who go through like 12-step programs will say, no, I'm still an alcoholic, I'm just a sober alcoholic, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's that same kind of acknowledging your past while also acknowledging your present is kind of the thing that I'm going for there. I'm definitely still a weenie. I'm still like such a scaredy cat. I we were watching Talk to Me, which admittedly is a very scary movie, and we had to pause it. We were watching it at home, and we had to pause it halfway through. My husband was making dinner, and I went down to the basement to put the laundry in the dryer, and
Oh,
I
not the dreaded
barely
basement.
survived that trip to the basement. I thought I was gonna just crawl into a corner and die right there on the spot. So, I still get scared by these things. I'm not one of those. There are people who are horror fans who are just sort of allergic to showing that they're scared, and that's just not me. I'll deal with it. I'll, put on my like big girl pants and just brave it anyway, but I'm definitely scared when I'm watching these movies.
Yeah, I think I remember reading something to the effect of like you still sometimes watch things, between your fingers.
Oh, no question. Yeah. I mean, we went to see Alien Romulus in theaters, and I was just like, oh man, the floor is so interesting in here, you know? Oh, that's just fascinating pattern, huh?
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, I consider myself a horror fan. I don't know if I've ever considered myself a weenie, but I definitely there's some things that are just too much for me, even as someone who watches a lot of horror. And there are definitely times where I'm kind of watching things. I think for me, it's usually if it's something that feels realistic, like it could happen to someone, like really, and not just in the universe of the movie, that gets to me. That just icks me out.
Very real.
How difficult was it to write synopsis for these movies? I know you say that like you and your editor had looked at like Wikipedia and found those kind of dry, obviously. Um, from my perspective, it's great in this scary age of AI to have like these summaries written by real people who have seen the movies, and there's so much of your specific background in each one of these summaries.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'd say it was difficult. It was certainly labor intensive, just
I
from
bet.
just from like a strategy point of view. I would watch each movie at least twice, sometimes three times, while taking copious notes.
Hmm.
And then it was a matter of trying to decide kind of what details are important here, right? We can't have every little description of a scene or a set or an actor's face or what the music is doing or what the camera is doing, um, but it had to be enough detail so that you actually felt like you were kind of getting the point. And in that, actually, my editor's weeniedom was very helpful because she'd seen very few of the movies, so she could kind of tell me, okay, this makes sense, or like, no, you're focusing too much on the wrong thing here, or I need a little bit more on this plot line. But ultimately, I was kind of looking at it as a writing exercise. You know, how do you translate a visual image and visual storytelling to text? And I felt like, okay, I'm just going to use this to kind of sharpen my observational writing, um, and have a little fun with it. I mean, one of my favorite things to do while I'm watching a movie is, do a little light, Mystery Science Theater 3000, and even if it's a good movie,
Yeah.
crack some jokes, react to what's going on, and I got to put that into the synopsis, and that made it, more fun to write and hopefully more fun to read. And frankly, I think if you asked ChatGPT for a detailed plot synopsis of a horror movie, like, maybe you'd get something usable, but first off, a large language learning model doesn't know, it doesn't experience fear for one thing, so it can't actually tell you like this is scary or like this is not scary or this is a relevant detail for you to understand the rest of the plot. Like it doesn't have reason, it doesn't have logic, it doesn't have emotions.
Mhm. You
So
sure you're not talking
and
about
all,
Terminator right now?
yeah, right. But also, it might just give you straight up wrong information. I feel like if you asked ChatGPT for a plot synopsis of The Ring, you would like get a paragraph that was like more or less accurate, and then maybe you'd get a paragraph about like how the main character was really hoping that her boyfriend would propose because it's called The Ring, or something goofy
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it's just a misinformation machine.
All right.
Yeah, totally.
This has been my TED Talk. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think my next question kind of rolls off that quite nicely. I very much enjoyed all of your summaries. I liked the personality that you inject into them, the humor. I'd love to know more about how you kind of like, kind of struck a balance between inserting your personality and parentheticals and thoughts with that summary. Like, how did you kind of like find a rhythm for like when you should be like kind of putting your own kind of like jibes in there about stuff that's happening versus like when you kind of keep it more straightforward.
Yeah, it a lot of it was dependent on the subject matter of what was happening in the movie at that, at
Hmm.
any given moment. Not which is not to say that, I wasn't writing jokes about particularly horrifying deaths, because I definitely was. That was part of the that was part of the fun.
Hmm.
Um, but the thing about a joke is it's structured the same as, let's say, a jump scare, where it's build up, build up, build up, tension, 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 and then release. And the release is either the punchline or it's the scare.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of resonance there, and I personally, I think horror and humor go really well hand in hand. Um, and so the jokes, I was kind of using those as, so I've had people say to me, in the weeks since the book came out, like, "Oh, I read the book, it was so great, but honestly, I even had nightmares just from your descriptions. That's how much of a weenie I am." And so I was trying to at least avoid that as much as I could, get some laughs in there, relieve whatever tension the reader might be feeling. I will say there were a lot more jokes and a lot more detail. The first draft I wrote of the book was not quite twice as long as the finished product. And we were really just running up against, page count. And so I had to cut a fair amount of detail. But honestly, I feel like it made for a better finished product. I mean, it's trimmer and it's easier to read, but I did lose some good jokes, which that's
Mm.
okay. They'll find their way into something else down the line.
Yeah, you wrote them once, so you've got them on record. You can slide them in somewhere else, right?
Right.
Now, I know like the way that you would trim a novel is kind of like, I don't know, like trimming your great work or something like that. It can be difficult to cut things and leave stuff on the cutting room floor. I know that certainly you came up with a great selection of movies across many different time periods and directors. Um, I'm sure if I asked you how many movies got cut, you'd give me a whole list. Was there one that you're specifically that you love that you wish you could have written about in the pages there?
Yeah, there are so many, honestly. Yeah, the original brainstorm list of movies that I wanted to include was more like 45 books or 45 movies, excuse me, and the finished book is 25 movies. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to cut a lot, but the one that really killed me was Jaws.
Mm,
Oh,
Just because it
man.
is one of I've easily seen it 30 times at this point. It is top 3 favorite movies of all time for me. And at this point, honestly, I talked myself out of it and I can't even remember why, which is insane. But
Mm,
honestly, if I sat down today to make a list of what movies I would want to put in the book, it would almost certainly be a, different list than what ended up in the book.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's what I figured, and that's why I was like, I don't wanna be like, "Oh, well, why wasn't so and so in the book?" 'Cause I'm sure, it was a idea, and I don't think, like, and let's share that, like, some of the movies that maybe I thought would have been in the book ended up showing up on some of the pages anyways. You add, like, quick, um ideas of either spoilers or um, additional background into some of the genres of the movies in the pages of this book, and maybe some of the ones that might have
mhm.
gotten included show up on those pages.
Yeah, that was definitely me trying to just like get them in there however I could because I was feeling guilty.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely feeling that in your blurb about religious horror, talking about, things like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and, your discussion of The Omen in there too, but it not showing up as a chapter, like, I could totally understand where you're like, "Okay, well, we've done some religious horror, like, let's move on to some other subgenre."
Yeah, there were definitely tough cuts. The Omen is one of my personal favorites, but it was doing too much of the same stuff that The Exorcist was doing, and The Exorcist
Mhm.
is just undeniably a more influential and let's just say it better movie. So I
Mhm.
thought, okay, we gotta take The Omen out of here. It doesn't earn its place, I guess. And we actually cut Friday the 13th because my editor very correctly pointed out that my dislike of that movie was palpable in what I had written about it. And frankly, it wasn't doing anything that Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street weren't doing better. And they
Mhm.
had already, those were already cemented in the book. Like those were definitely going to be there, especially because when you're looking at Friday the 13th, I mean the influence comes more from the franchise than from the first movie, and that was just something that there wasn't space to get into, and that turned into that kind of um, sidebar on franchises, horror, like the famous horror franchises, and just kind of like little capsule info about all of them. But yeah, there were some really tough cuts. That I will say that that entry on the Omen may make itself known in the coming weeks somewhere on the internet. So more to come on
Nice.
that.
Yeah, I'd love to read that. I'm a big fan of The Omen myself. My wife is too. She turned me on to it. It's a real bummer about Jaws, one of my favorite movies as well, and I hate that there's this, like, really annoying discourse about whether it's actually a horror movie or not, so I'm glad that you're like, "That's one of my favorites, it belongs in a horror movie book," because I hate when people try and claim it's not a horror movie, it makes me so annoyed.
There's very little I find more annoying than people arguing about what does and does not count as a horror movie, honestly.
Mhm.
Like there's room in this genre for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I really liked that you talked about was about, the worth and impact of a horror movie is not necessarily tied to whether it's scary or not. But I was kind of wondering about what do you think is the least, the least scary horror movie to you that you think is still, important to discuss?
Well, I have two answers to that, and the more reasoned intellectual answer is I think any of the older movies in the book, really the kind of pre 19, let's say 80,
Mhm.
well, pre The Exorcist, really. Those movies are less scary just because sort of our cultural conventions of what is scary have changed so much over the subsequent decades.
Mhm.
You're not getting jump scares in Rosemary's Baby, right? You're not getting that sort of now ubiquitous sort of like A24 scary house style, right? But
Mhm.
it's scary for its subject matter, not its filmmaking style. So that's my intellectual answer. My personal emotional answer is 100% The Wicker Man.
Oh, nice.
Which is a movie that is I showed it to a friend recently and she was like, "I can't do scary movies." I was like, "You have nothing to worry about." This is not a scary movie. It is a disturbing movie, but like
Yes.
there's nothing. Like it's kind of a goofy musical, right? Like I love that movie, but it is
Oh, me too.
yeah.
Yeah, I was really glad that you featured it in the book. It's one of my favorites, but it is forgive the pun, it is the ultimate slow burn. Um, and, yeah, it is I'm really glad you included it. It's a fun movie. Yeah, not scary, but it is deeply unsettling, as you mentioned, especially the kind of culmination of it the first time that you see it. On subsequent viewings, I think I just appreciate more and more the groundwork that they're laying building up to the end there. And I've also in recent years come to appreciate it even more as a big fan of Edgar Wright and
Mhm.
specifically Hot Fuzz and how much
Yes.
Hot Fuzz kind of mirrors The Wicker Man right down to the fact that it has what's the actor's name? Is it Robin Hardy? Or am I thinking is that the director's name?
Robin
Um,
Hardy's the director. Christopher Lee? No. No, Edward
the
Woodward, sorry.
yes, yes, he is in Hot Fuzz, and so I'm just like I love that connection to to The Wicker Man.
Yeah, and really just like foundational to a whole subgenre that, was not primarily, well, it kind of was primarily a British subgenre at least for a couple decades, but I mean it just,
Mhm.
in the last couple decades we've had this explosion of folk horror all over the world. And it's one of my personal favorite subgenres, so I felt very, very strongly about including The Wicker Man.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny when I was reading it earlier, I was talking with my wife, and I was thinking, "Yeah, you know what? I think folk horror is one of my favorite horror genres." Like, I don't think I ever, like, connected those dots until I was reading The Wicker Man and then reading your little blurb about folk horror after that, like, "Okay, yeah, it is one of my favorite horror genres. Sweet."
Yeah, consistently punching above its weight, I'll say that.
Mhm,
Yeah, so it's great that we found your least scary horror movie in the book because I found in your Hereditary write up that you pretty much spell out that if you've bought the book, you probably aren't ready for that movie. Do you think that it is the scariest movie in your book? And is your hope that maybe some readers will work through the book and watch some of these and maybe uh get the spirit up to watch some of the scarier entries?
I do think Hereditary is oh, scariness is fear is so individual, like what scares me is not necessarily what's going to scare you. I'm particularly susceptible to jump scares, to like the negative space tension, like, oh, that character is standing in front of a doorway. I'm just staring at the doorway, waiting for whatever's going to come, jumping out of the shadows. For other people, those are just, nothing. But they can't do gore or they can't do suspense or, people have so many different, preferences and kind of levers and triggers that form their taste that it's very difficult to say with any objectivity, this is the scariest. But for me, no question, Hereditary is the scariest movie in the book. From a filmmaking perspective, I'm still so angry that that was a debut feature. Like he just burst onto the scene with so much confidence in his technique and in his
mhm.
restraint. You don't get that just in terms of filmmaking prowess. And a lot of the time what you see with both authors and filmmakers when they're working on their first project, they tend to overstuff it. They're like, "Oh god, this might be the only chance I ever get to do this. I got to put all my ideas in here." And there's a tendency with debut creators to want to over explain, and with Ari Aster there was just none of that. He was like, "I am giving you as little information as possible." As I think I said this in the book, but it's a movie that really rec- uh, rewards repeat viewings, but it is
Hmm.
almost punishingly difficult to watch. Just from an emotional perspective too. I mean, it is brutal. Um, but to the second part of your question, Max, I think I I would love it if this book could introduce people to some movies that they might never have thought, oh, I want to give that a shot, or movies that they thought, that's really not for me. And maybe they read this book and they're like, I think I probably could watch 28 Days Later. My dad, for one, my dad is not particularly a scary movie aficionado. And he read the book and he was like, well, I'm going to watch Hereditary. I was like, okay, man, good luck.
Yeah, that's quite the movie to jump into if you're not a horror movie person. Really, that and Midsummer is like, whoa, hello.
Oh my God, right?
Yeah, for me, like when I go through the book, yeah, you say everybody has different levers that they pull, and for me, it's probably not too unusual that the ones that I haven't seen are something like Saw or The Fly, because I don't particularly love these
Hmm.
graphic, gory body horror movies. So it was fun reading those two synopses and saying to myself, well, these aren't so bad. I should probably give them a try.
I would be certainly interested to hear how that goes for you if you decide to go forward with it. I think that Saw is a much easier movie to watch than people think it is. Only the first one.
Yeah.
I'm only talking about the first one. It's not that gory,
Mm.
just by virtue of the fact that they were making it on a shoestring budget and they just didn't have the money. When Carrie Elwes saws his leg off, he's doing it off camera. You're hearing some creative Foley work and seeing a reaction from the other actor, but it's not in your face. The Fly, on the other hand, is very in your face. So they're kind of two different ends of that particular spectrum.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah, those are 2, in the book that I haven't seen either,
Oh,
Max. The Fly, I feel like I'm really glad to hear about Saw because I think that was one of the things that I was questioning. What am I gonna be getting into a movie that's kinda like Hostel, where it's like the torture porn stuff? Then I'm like, that's just not my bag.
Mhm.
And The Fly is Cronenberg, and I've in recent years sat down and watched some of Cronenberg's movies, and I just feel like that's not my it's just not my thing. His style of body horror, his style of movie is just not really. I'm not operating on the same wavelength, but people keep telling me I need to see The Fly, so I feel like that's one I gotta give a shot.
I would say if you're gonna do one Cronenberg, that's probably the one to do. Just in terms of, I mean, it's certainly one of his more commercial movies and more accessible.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is difficult to watch from a body horror perspective.
I probably will watch that between my fingers, no doubt. Yeah, sure. I feel like we've talked through a few. I'm curious. So the jacket says that this is the first book in the Outsider's Guide series. I was wondering, are you going to be writing more books in this series, or this is kind of like a one-off for you?
So this is a one off, at least for now. I don't know if it goes you know and becomes crazy successful. Maybe they'll want me to do a second one. I,
Hmm.
I had said to my editor while I was writing it, I said, this very easily could have been a book just about horror movies since the year 2000.
Hmm.
And there were so
Yeah.
many that I wanted to I mean, I certainly had enough movies to fill a second book. And there are all kinds of different directions you could take that. You could do a guide to specific subgenres, but that's not the kind of gist of the series. The series is going to be a series from Quirk, and it's going to be books in this format on different subjects, written by subject matter experts in those fields. I believe they're working on one about reality TV,
Hmm.
sort of like the, I think specifically like The Bachelor, kind of those type shows.
Okay.
There's been talk of other topics. I think I had kind of jokingly mentioned to them, I'm like, oh yeah, you should do sci-fi for Earthlings at some point. So it'll be, topic for, insert group of people who don't like that topic.
Yeah,
So yeah,
seems
I'm
like 'em.
I'm very excited to see where they go with it, because I definitely need the reality show one, because that's not my bag at all.
All right, Emily. So my last two questions here kind of coincide with each other. One is that one of the fun games I found while using your book was telling my wife the basic idea of each one of the movies and having her try to guess which movie it was. How much thought went into those blurbs, and have you thought about expanding them out across your social media platforms?
No, but that's a really good idea. I'm actually this week I'm hosting a horror movie trivia night with a bookstore a little ways north of me, up here in Massachusetts, and that actually could be a really great sort of like bonus round.
Yeah.
So I love that idea. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Man.
um, those little one-off, kind of the basic idea. You know, I had the I guess I had the flexibility of not having to capture, you know, super seriously what the movie was about in those. All right, I'm going to tell you the whole movie like halfway down the page, right? So here's my opportunity to kind of get a joke off,
Yeah.
right? But some of them, I don't know, some of them didn't quite lend themselves as well to, jokes in that section. Some of them were just a little too complicated or a little too serious. But mostly that was just me having fun.
Yeah. And then I saw that you had kind of like continued your book in a way on your website, and you did fun horror for weenies type synopsis for recent releases like Longlegs and Alien Romulus. If you've seen it, could you give me a basic idea you might actually want to watch if and you should definitely avoid the hot horror movie of the moment, The Substance?
So I was supposed to go see it on Friday, and
Oh,
my plans ended up falling through. But I'm pretty sure I can do this just based on, what the trailer and what I've read about it. Okay, let's see. The basic idea. Demi Moore plays an aging actress who takes a mysterious drug that makes her a brand new person. Literally. I don't know. It's not my strongest work, but still. I would say you might actually want to watch if you'd like to be talked out of getting Botox. um, you might want to avoid if you've already had Botox and would like to continue getting it.
Well done on the spot.
Thank you.
Oh,
I am looking forward to that one though. And yeah, the weenie reports on the website, that's what I'm calling them. That came out of people saying to me, oh, is such and such new movie going to be in the book? And I, just based on how book publication cycles work, no.
Mhm.
But people were saying, oh, I wish I had this for Long Legs, or because it was so buzzy that it was even kind of breaking containment and reaching non-horror fans. And I thought, well, I can do that actually. It's not going to be quite as detailed in the plot synopsis, because I'm sitting there trying to take notes in a dark movie theater, but I can still kind of do, here's the gist for anyone who's definitely not going to see it and wants to spoil themselves. And I have a couple more of those in the works actually. I've got a couple dropping soon. I'm going to do one for Oddity, and I'm going to do one for Cuckoo.
oh, fun. But yeah, I appreciate you talking to Evan and I and our audience about your book today. That the book is titled Horror for Weenies, and you can get it at most publishers. Emily, is there anything else you want to kind of promote about your book, or let people know about it or yourself?
I would say, one of the other things I do on my website, which is readjumpscares.com, is I maintain a running list of all of the year's new horror books. And this was something I started doing out of necessity for myself, and then I realized, oh, this is useful for other people too. So that is something that I've heard time and time again from booksellers, reviewers, podcasters, YouTubers. That it's a great resource for them. It helps them find new horror books. And so if you're someone who likes to read horror, I suggest you take a look. You'll hopefully find something that you might not have found otherwise. And that's also where the Weenie reports live, and there's more about the book there as well. So that's readjumpscares.com.
So before we go into our famous "What You've Been Watching" section, we're gonna do some just promotion for the podcast here. And as always, if you want to find the podcast online, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. We've been on there a lot lately, getting listens. And you can email us at itsthepictures@gmail.com. You can find me at Twitter X at MEH Colville. You can find me at Blue Sky itsthepictures.substack.com, which is also the website of the newsletter where most recently I was talking about some of the new anime of the season that I was anticipating, including Dan the Dan, which I had the pleasure of seeing the first 3 episodes, and Uzumaki, which I watched the premiere last night. And Evan, where can they find you?
Ooh, let's see. I am on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Letterboxd, and Instagram as Real Recon. That's real as in film reel. And then you can find me each week over at Spoiler Piece Theater, where you can get anywhere you get podcasts.
And Emily, where do you want to share your socials with the audience?
Absolutely. I am on Blue Sky and sort of on Twitter these days. The handle for both is at Emily Hughes, and on Instagram at EMC Hughes 17. I didn't get the full name on that one, unfortunately. But yeah, those are my three.
Emily, can you tell us a little bit of what you've been watching?
Yes. So I also watched the Uzumaki premiere, which I really enjoyed. They really nailed the art style, and it seems like it's very faithful so far. I mean, like very faithful to the manga. But I was really really into that. I recently finished Scavenger's Reign, really in an animation phase right now, I guess, which I thought was fantastic, and I will be devastated if nobody picks it up for a second season. Completely insane decision to cancel it after one season. Like one of the most inventive things I've watched in ages. Let's see. I also watched Tigers Are Not Afraid recently, which was Issa Lopez's kind of breakout directorial feature before she made True Detective Night Country, which I enjoyed immensely. And Tigers Are Not Afraid. It's a story of kids orphaned by the drug war in Mexico, and it's a little bit magical realist, and it's a little bit horror, and it really
Hmm.
kind of hit me out of nowhere. There are a couple moments that I was just like, it kind of like hit me physically almost. It was so
Yeah.
powerful. Fascinating movie. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've
Hmm.
seen that one
Some real
too.
gut punches
Yeah,
in it.
I like that one.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of deaths that really just like laid me out. Oof.
For myself, I went to the movies 3 times in 3 days, and I hadn't done that in a long time. And I ended up traveling up to Boston to see the new Sean Baker movie Anora, which won the Palme d'Or, and we've talked about a lot. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed the movie, and what nobody told me was that the second half of it is basically like it felt like a Coen Brothers movie in a way. Like it's very funny. I didn't expect that at all,
Mhm.
and I think it's my favorite Sean Baker film now, and you can take that as you will, depending on your mileage on his movies already.
I do really want to see Anora, though. It looks
Uh,
fantastic.
yeah, me too. Yeah, I think I don't go up as much for press screenings in Boston just because it's a little more of a haul for me.
Mhm.
But that's definitely on my list. I do wanna see it.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, my husband is also a big Sean Baker fan, so he's like, cannot wait. I saw Red Rocket. I liked it. It was fine. I didn't
Yeah,
like it as
kinda
much as
how
he
I felt
did,
about it.
but
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. I wasn't as high in the Florida Project as other people, but I do wanna see some of his other films.
mhm.
Um, I've heard Sean Baker is also a really cool guy in terms of, like, I've known people who wanted to see some of his earlier films, and they're having trouble finding him, and they were just saying on Twitter, like, "Oh, I wish I could see blah, blah, blah," and he messaged them and was like, "Here, I'll send you a copy so you can watch it." It was like, "Whoa, that's so cool."
That rules. That makes me
Yeah.
happy to hear. That's the kind of thing you want out of, a creative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very cool, and more than one person has said that, so it's not just like he was nice to one person.
Yeah, he had to be nice to multiple people. That's good. It's like Keanu Reeves, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, he seems like a real stand-up guy.
Yeah, a mensch.
So, Evan, unfortunately, we were having a lot of technical issues that this episode, but I'd like to take this a quick moment and thank Emily so much for joining us on this episode, and I hope you enjoyed her interview with us and the conversation. But Evan and I wanted to get on because we both saw the Francis Ford Coppola dream project, Megalopolis, and we definitely want to spend a moment to talk about it.
Oh, for sure. Like, how could you not wanna talk about this movie? I mean, for me for me also, I went to see this at a press screening, which was kind of a unique experience unto itself because they were at the time showing it, and I think they said 65 theaters across the country, and they were live streaming an interview with Francis Ford Coppola via the New York Film Festival, or was moderated by the New York Film Festival, that also had Spike Lee and Robert De Niro on the panel. So that that made an interesting experience. A preamble to this movie is this interview with these three people. Francis Ford Coppola kind of on sometimes quite coherent and sharp, and other times rambling and incoherent. And then these stories like, oh, how do you know Spike Lee? How do you know Robert De Niro? And Spike Lee literally just sitting there, like physically and metaphorically poking De Niro to try and get him to talk shit about Trump. It was just absolutely nuts.
Yeah, I think I heard something like about that where it was like De Niro says like, "Oh, Trump can't make a film like this." I was
Yeah.
like, "What?"
Yeah, and that got him going. It got him going. Yeah, you started talking about Trump, and you could see Spike Lee's eyes light up like, "Yes, exactly what I wanted to happen. De Niro's mad about Trump, and now he's gonna be shit talking Trump. This is, like, the best thing ever."
Well, maybe that was more or less interesting than the movie, which as we mentioned during the podcast, Coppola has been trying to make for decades, and he
Yeah.
similar to like his Apocalypse Now production. He mortgaged the farm, if you will, and used 100 million of his money to make this film, and he has he gets the guy who wants to have every work with every prominent director ever, Adam Driver, as his lead,
Mhm.
and the cast is like round out with Aubrey Plaza as Wow Platinum. I think you have Shia LaBeouf and John Voight in there, and like um who else? The actor from Breaking Bad is in a prominent role, right?
Which actor from Breaking Bad? Oh, Juan Carlo Esposito,
Yeah.
yes. It took me a minute. I was like, "Okay." Yeah, this is a very stacked cast. It's a deep bench of players. I mean, Lawrence Fishburne, Talia Shire, Jason Schwartzman, even people from like James Remar, Chloe Fineman. It's a pretty sprawling cast of
And
characters.
like Dustin Hoffman's in the film for like a hot second. His
Yep,
character like
he's in it.
disappears.
Yeah. Yeah, it's chock full of actors and ideas, but Max, I'm curious because I don't think I told you what I thought of the movie, but I haven't had a chance to hear what you thought of it since you've seen it. So tell me, what was it like seeing this movie? What'd you think of it?
So I think I alluded to it a little bit where I was the only one laughing in the theater, and
Yep.
like I think like you can't go in this movie with a straight face and just like
Mm,
um think it's like a serious thing. It has like Lawrence Fishburne narration like randomly like trying to set the pace for different sequences, and then you have I don't know. There's a line going around on the internet where it has like Adam Driver's character going like I'm going to the club, and like his delivery of that is just ridiculous.
yep.
There's a scene later in the movie where I forget if it's like Shia LaBeouf, but like they're like him and a bunch of other guys, maybe like white nationalists, or like they have hats on, and they throw their hats on the floor in like synchronized order, and I'm just like, there's no way that this movie can be taken seriously, or like the whole arrow thing. Remember, like he's like, "Oh, only you can make me have a boner this big," and like, he has a bow and arrow underneath his blanket.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this is a crazy movie. I mean, it's hard to even like synopsize. You know, we talked about it on spoiler piece, and I think it took me several minutes to kind of like even describe to listeners what the plot is because it's just there's so much going on here. But like, wow, this movie is just absolutely bonkers. It's stuffed to the brim with ideas.
yeah, and I think like some of it is like cool to look at. Like I like the scene, maybe 60, like a little over half of the way through the movie, where like Adam Driver and I think it's like Natalie Emmanuel is the actress who co-stars with him,
Yes.
and they're like on these like construction beams, like just hanging out above traffic. I'm like, I don't know why you're up there or like what you're doing, but I don't
Mhm.
know. At least it's visually interesting.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I think I said to you, there were times where I didn't know what the fuck I was watching. This movie was so out there, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. I thought it was very impressive from a visual perspective. The cinematography, the art direction. I thought it was actually well paced, given its almost 2.5 hour runtime. I was just sucked in by the visuals of it, even though there was so much here that just doesn't work plot wise and performance wise. I mean, I know a lot of people have said they feel like all of these actors are acting in their own movie and none of them are really acting in the same movie, and I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, like they all got like different direction and like
Yeah. But I do think John Voight is acting in this movie. I do think he is acting in this movie when other people aren't necessarily. I think John Voight is in the right place.
yeah, because like I feel like it's almost like a waste of time to like try to make a synopsis from it. And I'm guess like if you want a true synopsis, listen to this week's spoiler piece. Um, but
Yeah.
like
I mean, I could give like a two-sentence summary. It's basically like you have this city called New Rome that's kind of like a mix between, the Roman Empire's Rome and New York City, and you have Adam Driver as like an architect trying to build utopia, and Juan Carlo Esposito is the mayor and like kind of part of the old guard, and he's trying to prevent that from happening. So it's basically that's like the crux. And his daughter starts dating Adam Driver and falls in love with him and wants to build this utopia. And the mayor's like, "Oh hell no, I'm not gonna let that happen."
and they have magic powers.
Yes, they can stop time together. Their love can stop time, people. Yeah, buried the lead on that one.
Yeah, like the movie opens and it looks like Adam Driver's character was like like jump off a building or something, and he's just like testing his time stopping ability, and you're like, is this a superhero movie? And nope. uh, and like the movie, like it's infatuated with that Rome, right? The idea of Rome and Third Rome, and because like all the costume design is like out of the Roman period, where uh, people are wearing motifs and stuff that would feel right at home in that period. And even
Hmm.
Adam Driver's character is named Caesar. So I don't know like what dreams Francis Ford Coppola was having when he said that he just couldn't get this one out of his head and he had to make it, but he's having some wild dreams.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And you mentioned the dialogue is very, very kooky and very often it seems like a horny old man wrote this. There's no better way to describe the dialogue. It's just so over the top.
Yeah, I saw someone like say some of the lines of the movie like online, and I forget like Aubrey Plaza's character has one at the beginning of the movie where she's obviously very much in love with Adam Driver's character, and he wants nothing of it. And she's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you're so anal, but I'm so oral," or something like that.
Yep.
I'm like,
Oh my god. Yep.
I was like, "What?"
It's
Oh,
absolutely stuff like that. And you mentioned John Voight's thing about his boner when he's hiding a, bow and arrow under the sheet. Like, oh my god. This movie.
yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. I wouldn't say like I it, it's is it worth seeing, Evan? I don't know if I'd go that far. Like,
See, I kind of think yes, just so you can see what a train wreck it is. And I would rarely say this about this kind of movie, but I kind of feel like it's important to see it in the theater with like a crowd on the big screen because I feel like that definitely adds a lot. I don't think this movie would be nearly as whatever it is if you saw it on the small screen at home.
well, I think that time is very rapidly running out to see it
Yep.
on a big screen. But like we said, the forefront of the movie bombed pretty badly, and I can't imagine it being held in too many theaters for too long. So if you want that experience of watching Ford Coppola's latest in the theater, you better head out post haste.
Yep.
All right, and of course, now the podcast seems to be working fine. Now that it's just Evan and I, go figure. Um,
Of
but
course.
Evan, as always, I thank you for fighting off the storm and fighting off the cold for at least a little while, and joining us for this podcast.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be here, and I was getting toward the end, starting to have sneezing fits, so I'm glad I was able to like stave that out for long enough to record a little bit longer.
All right, and once again, a shout out to Emily who could not join us for the ending here, but thanks so much. And well, I guess I could talk for Evan and myself that we both greatly enjoyed your book. I hope it finds an audience here going into spooky season, and people who maybe are too afraid to partake into some great horror movies might be interested in horror for weenies and read about some horror instead.
Yeah, absolutely. You should pick it up, listeners. We very much enjoyed it, and yeah, good luck to Emily with all the promotion.
All right, thanks, Evan.
Thanks,
All
Max.
right, bye, everyone.